Take a second to think about your average day. How often are you not moving in some way? If you're like me, even when you're sitting down at your computer, you're shifting around and fidgeting, or I'll click a pen and spin back and forth in my seat. I'm typing on my keyboard or looking back and forth at the monitors. Even when I'm laying down to relax, I'm typically watching something or scrolling through stuff on my phone. It's not very often that we slow down enough and remove the distractions to be still. Scripture talks about stillness as a state of being when we gain clarity and find rest. And that's what we're going to talk about today. Why it's so hard to be still and what we can gain from it.
Do you know how when you go to the doctor and they're checking your lungs, they put the stethoscope on your back and tell you to take a deep breath? Then they move the stethoscope and tell you to take another deep breath? And they do that probably 3 to 5 times, right? Then they tell you to breathe normally. And all of a sudden you realize you don't know how to breathe normally anymore, only deeply. For the next few minutes, you're intently focused on your breathing and trying to figure out what is normal, alternating between deep breathing and holding your breath. How long should a breath take anyway? How many times a minute am I supposed to breathe? I find stillness to be the same way. I can sit like a bump on a log for a whole TV show and not move once. But tell me to be still, and all of a sudden it feels impossible to not move. Everything starts to itch, or I feel an intense need to stretch. Being still can be great, but it can also feel overwhelming. One of the most famous passages of Scripture that deals with being still comes from Psalm 46. Let's take a look at that now. God is our refuge and strength, an ever-present help in trouble. Therefore, we will not fear, though the earth give way and the mountains fall into the heart of the sea, though its waters roar and foam and the mountains quake with their surging. There is a river whose streams make glad the city of God, the holy place where the Most High dwells. God is within her. She will not fall. God will help her at break of day. Nations are in uproar, kingdoms fall. He lifts his voice, the earth melts. The Lord Almighty is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress. Come and see what the Lord has done, the desolations he has brought on the earth. He makes wars cease to the ends of the earth. He breaks the bow and shatters the spear. He burns the shields with fire. He says, "Be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the earth. The Lord Almighty is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress." A little background on this scripture. This psalm provides a picture of the protection and care that God has for us, similar to that of a fortified city. The 3 words used in the passage are refuge, strength, and fortress. God's presence is promised to always be with God's people. This particular psalm may actually be trying to recount the emotions of the Israelites during the Assyrian siege of Jerusalem in 701 BC. This was a historical siege of Jerusalem where the Assyrians were unable to conquer Jerusalem. During this time, the Assyrians were the big military power of the day. They had already laid siege to Samaria and conquered it. In fact, in the Assyrians' accounts of their sieges during this time, Jerusalem is the only city they do not capture. In verse 4, the psalmist writes, "There is a river whose streams make glad the city of God, the holy place where the Most High dwells." This sounds like a reference to something that happened during the siege. In an effort to deprive the Assyrians of water, springs outside the city were blocked. Workers then dug a 433-meter tunnel to the spring of Gihon, providing the city with fresh water. Access to resources like water were crucial for both holding and surviving a siege. Hezekiah, the king of Judah at the time, gathered the citizens in the square and encouraged them by reminding them that the Assyrians possessed only an arm of flesh, but the Judeans had the protection of Yahweh. The psalm goes on to reflect on how this city, the city of God, should respond to threats going on around it. It doesn't tell them to evacuate, to fortify their city, or to gather their weapons. Ultimately, the encouragement is to trust God, not the walls or any other strategies. It celebrates what God will accomplish and how God will deliver them from harm. The psalm comes to a close with a well-known refrain, "Be still and know that I am God." Instead of jumping to action, the psalmist encourages the city to turn to God first in prayer and stillness. If this passage is about the Assyrian siege of Jerusalem, we know that siege was broken when Isaiah writes, "Then the angel of the Lord went out and put to death 185,000 in the Assyrian camp. When the people got up the next morning, there were all the dead bodies." God delivered his people from harm, and all they had to do was be still. I don't know about you, but my first inclination when faced with danger is not to be still. I wouldn't say I'm a panicker, but I'm definitely not the kind to sit back and let something happen to me. I'm also not someone who has to be in control of every situation, but doing nothing would not be my first instinct. It reminds me of the characters in scary movies who have a knack for finding the worst place to hide and seem to just wait for the bad things to happen to them.
Let's hide in the attic.
No, in the basement. Why can't we just get in the running car?
Are you crazy? Let's hide behind the chainsaws.
Smart. Yeah, okay.
If you're in a horror movie, you make poor decisions. That's what you do.
This was a good idea. Shh, I'm being quiet. Breathing on me.
For them, it always turns out to be the wrong decision. But Psalm 46 is telling us that when it comes to trusting in God, it's the right decision. In our stillness, we recognize who God is and exercise our faith and trust in God. It is exactly what we're called to do in Psalm 46. Be still and know that I am God. This call to inaction and the feelings it stirs up in me makes me think of another passage from the Bible. Maybe you know this story too. In this story, Jesus visits Martha and Mary at their home. Here's what Luke tells us about that visit. As Jesus and his disciples were on their way, he came to a village where a woman named Martha opened her home to him. She had a sister called Mary who sat at the Lord's feet listening to what he said. But Martha was distracted by all the preparations that had to be made. She came to him and asked, "Lord, don't you care that my sister has left me to do the work by myself? Tell her to help me." "Martha, Martha," the Lord answered, "you are worried and upset about many things, but few things are needed, or indeed only one. Mary has chosen what is better, and it will not be taken away from her." Far too often, we play the role of Martha because that's who society tells us we are supposed to be. We have voices coming at us from all sides about who to be and what to do. We have friends, family, and society all telling us what we should be doing to be happy or successful. There's social media where we only see the best version of everyone else's lives, and it can give us a false sense of how our lives should look. Then there's the world of advertising that tells us we should look a certain way, act a certain way, eat a certain way, behave a certain way, and even desire certain things, all of which are usually more harmful than helpful to us. And even if we are told to slow down, it's usually in the form of doing something like yoga or travel to achieve that. None of these voices are telling us to be still. Jesus tells Martha she's worrying about a lot of things, but only one thing matters. That one thing Jesus is referring to is him. He holds Mary up as a model for Martha and for us because she's choosing the important thing. Mary chose to sit at Jesus' feet and listen. In other words, she chose to take to heart what the psalmist told us. Be still and know that I am God. Think about all the things you do each week. Most of us have a calendar full of activities and responsibilities pulling us in different directions. I'm not saying that you should get rid of everything on your calendar and sit around all day, but I am challenging you to look at the way that those activities and responsibilities affect your life. Sometimes doing too much can affect your physical or mental health. Sometimes it gets in the way of relationships with others and with God. I know I am definitely guilty of neglecting God in favor of the things on my to-do list. But I also know that carving out the time to be still and just sit in God's presence is never a decision I regret. It feeds my soul, grows my relationship with God, and makes me a better person. The world might be telling me to go and do, but I know that there is a real advantage to ignoring that. Stillness allows us to shut out all the other voices around us and focus on the one voice that truly matters most. It's that same voice that tells us not to be afraid, to trust that God is on our side and will be our fortress. Just like Mary, we can sit at Jesus' feet and listen, secure in the knowledge that we are doing exactly what we should be doing. All those other things that are vying for our attention and action can wait. Being still with God gives us the strength and peace we need to handle all those tasks in a way that doesn't leave us feeling exhausted and stretched too thin. That all sounds good, and we know it's important, but how do we do it? I would venture that there are very few people that are actually good at this, and I am definitely not one of them. But what if we try together over this next week to work at being better at being still? Start small with 1 or 2 minutes of stillness each day. Find a spot where you can ignore any technology or bustle going on around you. If all else fails, I know some people sit in their closet so that they can have uninterrupted space and time to be with God. Spend the time in prayer or read scripture. You can even just sit in complete silence and listen for God. However you choose to do it, enjoy those moments with God, knowing that you are exactly where you need to be and doing what God tells us in Psalm 46. Be still and know that I am God.